that my voice sounds rather hoarse. I am a full-time YouTuber. I have a channel called Holy Koolaid. The reason that I started on YouTube is because my family was extremely religious. My parents were missionaries to Azerbaijan, and I lived in the Muslim world. I've lived in multiple countries, and every single day of my life, from the time I was born until I went to college, was nothing but God and Jesus and religion. We were Protestant Christians, but every single morning was studying the Bible, and we go to church every single Sunday, and it was such a big part of my life. But once I fell in love with science, I started to realize that the evidence didn't match up to the claims that I had been told were true my entire life. And I wanted to discover how the world actually works. I believe that truth withstands scrutiny, and so I wanted to go out and scrutinize the world and figure out how this world works. And that's why I made my channel, and that's why I talk about science and I put out videos so that I can also have you guys come along and experience that journey with me.
Hello, my name is Alex. I am also a YouTuber, but also a full-time student. I study philosophy, and I study it joint with theology. For me, I never had the same kind of religious upbringing that most of my friends and colleagues seem to have when they do this kind of thing. For them, it's oftentimes with an essence of activism, because they've had a difficult time coming out of religion, and so do everything they can to make it easier for other people. Myself, I never had a problem. I was raised as a Roman Catholic in the UK. However, I didn't have much problem when I decided to leave the faith. I was just interested in philosophy, and so I started talking about that online, and I would talk about the philosophy of religion. But through doing so, I've met a great number of people who I'm very lucky to call my friends, who really are doing real activist campaigning in areas of the world where people can't do that as easily as I did. And I feel that if those people are able, despite the risks to their lives and to their reputation, to pursue truth wherever it leads, despite those risks that they face, then I have no excuse not to do it in the safety of the United Kingdom. And so that's why I continue to do it and continue to seek truth, primarily previously in the area of religious claims and atheism, but now also in areas of ethics, and specifically the ethics of non-human animals.
I'm Drew. I have a channel called Genetically Modified Skeptic. I originally thought I was going to be making videos about genetically modified foods and alternative medicine primarily, and eventually I started making videos about, well, actually pretty quickly I started making videos about atheism and realized that was really what I wanted to talk about primarily. Now, I was raised kind of similarly to how Thomas was. I was just always in Texas, which is somewhat of a different country than the rest of the United States on its own. So I guess you could say I was raised in another country outside the United States. We were pretty fundamentalist, think Orthodox Jew, except Christian. We didn't wear anything on our heads. We didn't think anything had to be above us, because we're from the United States. We're above everyone else. But around the age of 20, I took an astronomy class and basically realized, hey, the Earth isn't 6,000 years old. The universe is not 6,000 years old. And that was the first of several dominoes to fall. I ended up realizing that being gay wasn't a choice. It's something that has some genetic influence. It would have been entirely wrong for God to punish people for being exactly the way that he created them. Eventually, I kind of became somewhat of an agnostic, just totally in secret. Eventually, I ended up being an atheist. I felt completely alone and kind of insane at the time of, thank you for that. I don't know, I feel like I should have a line for like when people have their phones, going off. Sorry, that's a joke in my head, not to anyone else. No, so I felt alone and crazy when I was an atheist, when I first became an atheist, because no one around me was an atheist. I don't think I'd ever even met one before. Everyone I knew was Christian, and most people were fundamentalists. I ended up telling my parents maybe a year after I became an atheist, and right after that I realized I want to start making videos just to be able to vent all of the pent-up thoughts that I have about all of these topics. And one thing led to another, and I ended up quitting my job and being supported entirely off of Patreon to be a full-time atheist YouTuber. And now that's what I do. I try to make sure that other people don't feel as alone and as insane for being an atheist as I did during that year when I was just keeping it all inside.
We've got a mic shortage here. By the way, אם מישהו יכול לתקן את המיקרופון הזה, זה יהיה נהדר. תיקנתי. עובד.
יד אלוהים.
So, this one's louder, is it? Is it right? This one's a bit louder. The three of you have very different approaches to your content, which is good because it's not boring. But I'd like to focus a bit on each one of you with your specific angle. Alex, let's start with you. So how do you see your animal rights struggle and veganism sort of come together with this whole atheism thing, right? Do you see any correlation? Is this something you can discuss?
Certainly so. I mean, there are two areas to this. The first is the philosophy, which is just trying to find out what you think is true, and if there are such things as ethical truths, what they might be. But further than that, when you start talking about atheism and the atheist experience that people have in different areas of the world, you begin to realize that what you're really arguing for is human rights, the ability for people to express their opinions and have the thoughts that they have, that they can't help but believing without the threat of tyrannical oppression. And you just take that logic and extend it and see what other areas are there in this world where suffering is being caused, and you try to eliminate it. For me, I care about human rights. Human rights, I would rather say, when I say that I talk about animal rights, what people interpret that to mean is that I talk about non-human animal rights. When you say animal rights, you think about farms and zoos and bullfighting and this kind of thing. But human beings are animals too. So when we talk of animal rights, we're talking of the rights of every single sentient creature on this planet. All I've done is taken the same logic that I apply to human beings, where they deserve moral value, why they deserve moral value, where perhaps we might have some leeway on their moral value, and just applied it to other sentient creatures too. It's become apparent to me that the basis of ethics is in an ability to feel pain. And anybody who thinks, as C.S. Lewis did, that animals can't feel pain is simply lying to themselves. In fact, he had to deny the fact that animals were capable of feeling pain just so that he could reconcile it with a loving God. He said, I can't believe that a loving God would allow the kind of suffering that we put animals through. And so the only conclusion I can come to is that animals cannot feel pain. You'll notice C.S. Lewis, throughout all of his works, is very good at asking questions, but very, very poor at answering them. And this was an example. You have to take that kind of approach. You have to, as Descartes did, mechanize animals to being nothing but robots, essentially, with no sentient capacity in order to justify half, quarter, a third of what we do to them. And I simply realized that I can't do that anymore.
Thank you. Drew, what similarities do you see between the whole belief in alternative medicines and a belief in a God? Is that somewhere that sits in the same area in our brains?
Yeah, they definitely have the belief has a similar epistemology. So I don't know if anyone in this room knows about street epistemology. It's a method of asking questions. We have one person here. That's the guy to talk to. Oh, we have a couple people. Okay, I'm proud of you guys. Hopefully everyone at some point will watch some street epistemology content. Basically, it's a method of questioning why someone believes something and then trying to shed light on why that's a good or a bad reason for believing that thing. Now, if you perform that on people who believe in alternative medicine, you perform that on people that believe in God. Unless someone is maybe a religious apologist, they're probably going to say they believe it because of personal experience. You know, like I went to such and such place, I had this spiritual experience, and it made me really realize that God is real, and he's personal, and he cares about me. Now people will also say, well, the reason why I believe in essential oils and in using herbs to cure this and that instead of going to the doctor is that I had a headache or I had a rash or this or that, and I used it and it was all better. So that means that this thing must do this. Or maybe someone gets vaccinated and then they develop a chronic illness at some point. And they say, well, the chronic illness came after the vaccination, so, you know, post hoc ergo propter hoc, because this happened before this, that must have been the cause. So basically this false cause, this correlation happens in our heads through our personal experience, justifying this belief. Now, if you examine belief in God, there's people will throw apologetics at you. It's kind of cliched lines like, oh, well, look at the mountains, look at the trees, like simple stuff like that. It's so beautiful. Or they might throw something out like argument from design or Kalam cosmological argument. there are apologetics that people use in the alternative medicine world. Like, oh yeah, well the pharmaceutical companies are all corrupt, so that means that doctors don't know anything. Things like that. You'll encounter a similar attitude. So at a certain point, my wife actually, before I became an atheist, started talking to me about kind of the apologetics that people use to justify belief in alternative medicine. I kind of believed in alternative medicine, and she was pretty convincing why maybe I shouldn't believe in this. And eventually, both of us kind of started applying that to our belief in God, and that slipped away as well. And I think that just to be consistent, not giving credence to unjustified claims, unjustifiable claims in alternative medicine, you have to realize that maybe the religion you're clinging to isn't any more true.
You beat one of those, you can beat both. Is that sort of what you're saying, or is it not even? Can I suddenly stop believing in alternative medicines because I'm convinced and the science behind it, and still really strongly believe in a God?
Oh, absolutely, you can. And you can also be just like me, who completely agrees 100% with everything Alex has to say and is a huge hypocrite and eats meat. So that I would say that it's hypocrisy. And I promise, Alex, I want to work on my hypocrisy.
See me after class.
I was joking about how I was going to feel great, like right before his talk, because I was done giving my talk, but I wasn't feeling guilty yet. So Thomas's talk is going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. No, you definitely.
But behind the scenes, Thomas was the only one who was really. He looked like he was working on his lecture. These guys were just hanging out and enjoying themselves.
We were playing guitar back there, actually. You can believe in those things, and you can believe in one and not the other, or not believe in one and believe in the other. But I would say that that's hypocrisy. Now, my channel is kind of based on getting people to watch videos about why alternative medicine isn't all that, and they'll think, oh yeah, this is great, I love this. And then in the recommendations, they start seeing videos about why their religion is also nonsense. And I'll get you that way. That's the goal.
Thank you. Thomas, we'll try and spare your voice. I know you're a bit under the weather. So your channel gives a strong emphasis on a good scientific approach, right? Pro-science and reasoned thinking. How do you see this working towards a more atheistic world? What do you hope to achieve with this sort of approach?
So personally, I don't think that atheism should necessarily be a goal in and of itself. I think that atheism is the natural goal that you arrive at once you've tested how the world works and you get a better, more full understanding of the cosmos. And to clarify that, I'm not saying that atheism is a bad thing, but my point is that there are people in this world who claim to be atheists who are also believers that the earth is flat. They're rare, but I've met them. It's out there. And if that's the case, if there are people who are atheists who also, believe in crazy, wacko, pseudoscientific ideas, like psychics or like, astrology, that somehow the position of, stars or planets can predict your future, these are not people who are living their life based on reason. These are not people that are living their life using the scientific method to figure out how the world actually works. So when I encourage people to think using scientific skepticism, my goal is not just, oh hey, just stop believing in God. Yeah, there's a lot of harm that's caused by religion, and I'm going to touch on this in my talk later, but the point is not to just stop believing in something because, religion is harmful. If you do that, you stop believing in it for the wrong reasons. Because I could go and I could go and kill 100 people, and I may be a priest. That doesn't mean that the religion that I'm teaching is wrong just because I'm a bad person or a hypocrite. When the Catholic Church rapes and molests children by the thousands, that doesn't in and of itself mean that Catholicism is wrong. It just means that they're hypocrites and that they're evil and that they're horrible people. There's harm that's caused by religion, but that doesn't make the religion itself wrong. Now, when I encourage people to think using skepticism, and they go out and they actually test, the claims that are put forth in the Bible, that, they'll give the genealogies of how many people lived since the time of Adam, or, they'll talk about how the earth was created in 6 days and on the seventh God rested, and you can actually go out and you can look and examine the cosmos. We can study the cosmic microwave background radiation. We can actually look and use, basic trigonometry to figure out how far away certain stars are. We can see the rate that the cosmos is expanding at and extrapolate backwards to see when the Big Bang started. We can test using radiometric dating to see just how old the Earth is. And all of these methods, this is just scratching the surface. There are people who spend their entire lives, decades of their lives, studying this stuff in depth in so many different fields that overlap, and all of it contradicts the religious narratives that are put forth that put pseudoscience and spirituality and supernatural claims in the place of science. We're filling up those gaps. We don't need that anymore. But once you establish scientific skepticism, once you teach people how to think for themselves, then they can use that as a tool to examine their faith. And I think that the end result is that everyone will be an atheist. But I don't want atheists who just accept any old claim but just don't believe in God. No, I want people who became an atheist but not for the wrong reasons. They became one for the right reasons. And then we can actually use the same tools to create a better world for all of us.
Thank you. So let's bring it back to the local market for a minute. You guys have been here for a couple of days now, and I'm sure you met a few Jews in the streets. So from your understanding of Judaism, I know you guys usually talk about Christianity. Obviously, that's your home environment. But what do you find to be the most different aspect of Judaism compared to any other religion, really? Christianity, Islam, anything else? Whether it's the people or the way they approach it, the way they believe. I'd like to get all your thoughts.
So the number one difference is actually something that some of the contributors to this conference and I were talking about last night. I think that several of you who were there last night will know where I'm going with this. I think the difference is, like when I am working with communities of people who used to be religious, they'll say, I'm an ex-Christian, I'm an ex-Muslim. Those are the two main groups that I work with. And someone was saying last night, there's not really people who are going, oh, I'm an ex-Jew. You may not be a religious Jew anymore, but you still say, yeah, I'm Jewish, right? We don't really have that. It's not an identity outside of practicing within the religion. If you are not acting as a Christian anymore, you wouldn't call yourself a Christian. There's no more to being a Christian than acting as a Christian and being religious in that way. You have cultural Christianity, but that's literally not believing any of it and acting like a Christian. It's kind of the opposite of calling yourself a Jew and not practicing it. So I would say that's the number one difference. Also, the headwear is pretty cool. We don't have that.
That's an interesting point. How many, just a show of hands, how many of you don't consider yourselves to be Jews? Or not Jews? How many of you are not Jews? Yeah, I think that's... and this is an atheist conference.
How many consider themselves ex-Jews?
How many... Yeah, that's a good question. How many... Did you hear that?
Even if you consider yourself not Jewish.
How many people consider themselves ex-Jews?
Ex-religious, not ex-Jew.
But that's
Assuming
the
you guys
distinction
were
I'm
born
making.
Jewish, how many are ex-Jews? They're pretty much the same hands. And this is an atheist conference, right? Not a lot.
No, I mean, that's the interesting thing. I would have said the same. I would have had the immediate same immediate first reaction that it's complicated because of the difficulty in distinguishing Judaism as an ethnicity from Judaism as a religion. But we're beginning to see that creeping in other areas too. For instance, in the Northern Ireland conflict with the Republic of Ireland, although ostensibly there was a lot of religious warfare there, a lot of these people were in a similar sense kind of secular Protestants, secular Catholics. It's kind of like a heritage thing. We're beginning to see the same thing with Islam as well, where people are beginning to treat it as though actually there is something about Islam that defines your identity outside of the practice of the religion. Islam itself is a practice more than a set of beliefs. In the hadith of Gabriel, when Gabriel asks the Prophet Muhammad, what is Islam? He responds with the 5 pillars. That's where we get it from. It's only when he then asks what faith is that we get the series of beliefs. Islam itself is just a series of practices. However, now we're beginning to see it as a basis for identitarianism. So maybe it's not so unique. I'm not sure, but what's certainly true is that despite that cultural influence, you can still call yourself an ex-Muslim. Although I've seen some interesting ways that people suggest that actually that isn't possible within Islam, or that they've been kind of fooled into becoming ex-Muslims, or the opposite. I've seen some conferences where somebody gets up to ask a question and says, so when we deal with people who are not Muslims, not Muslims yet, and that's like the approved way of talking about non-Muslims. So you do get it creeping into other areas too, but there's something very specific, and I think it's got a lot to do with the history of the politics of the Jewish nation. That leaves us with a kind of intangible collation of the two concepts. And maybe it's about time that we started adapting our language to really distinguish those who want to identify with their ancestors, but not with their beliefs.
I think one of the number one differences that I've noticed is that there's less of a push to proselytize to the world. So when I go out in public, I don't see a whole lot of Jewish missionaries all around the world. When someone comes and knocks on my door, it's usually a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness, sometimes a Protestant Christian. I see some Muslim missionaries. I never have someone come knock on my door and say, hey, I'd like to talk with you about Moses, and how he led my people out of Egypt. I've never had a Jewish missionary approach me, and I'm not sure if that is a thing or if that's just a thing that happens to, I know that I've talked to Jews who are secular, and they'll say that, people will try to bring them back, try to bring them back into the religion. And I'm not sure how much of that is a good thing. In a way, it's good that, the religion, because, I think that all religion is harmful because religion is based in faith and not in science. But in terms of not spreading the religion to other places, that's a good thing. What is the reasoning for that? Is it a kind of almost a nationalistic ideology where, we think that we are the chosen people? That's a dangerous position. That's a dangerous idea. Anyone who thinks, and this happens in Christianity, and this happens in Islam and stuff too, where people say, we are God's elect, we are chosen by God. And as soon as you do that, you've created a tribalistic, identitarian society where it is in-group and out-group, us versus them, and it can lead in violence and it can lead in war. And so I don't think that it's necessarily a good thing, that, the reason behind it, but the fact that it's not proselytized and spread is a big difference that I've noticed.
I think as a Jew, or ex-Jew, that's part of the Jewish sort of strategy, and that's also the main reason why there are only 15 million Jews in the world, right? It's a numbers game. We're not going knocking on doors. We, Jews in Israel especially, do feel that pressure, right? The whole Chabad and all that kind of thing. You wouldn't feel that. And that's, we seem to think of ourselves as this huge, main religion, 0.2% of the world, right? That's what we are, and relates to what you just said. So last question, because we had the signal. What kind of videos, you guys are YouTubers, by the way, I didn't mention this, they have hundreds of thousands of followers together. That, in Israeli terms, that's huge, and also for American terms. So what kind of videos
the UK.
Sorry about that.
How could you forget us?
It's only been a few decades.
Yeah.
What kind of videos do you guys find that work best? And I don't know, work is define work, but maybe it is number of views. Also, what you get the most reactions out of, are you angry? Are you active? What do you do to get the most out of your videos?
Talking about something new, and when you find that people, there are certain videos that do well, and they tend to be ones that are quite cheap. You just take on a very easy argument and you be a bit sarcastic about it and you try and be funny, and people like that kind of thing. But then what I find interesting is when I take the exact same approach and apply it to an equally bad argument, but for something that's more popularly believed, like, for instance, to pluck something out of thin air at random, animal rights. And you see them kind of go, yeah, I'm doing the same thing, but that keeps it fresh. I hate the idea that I'll ever have a YouTube channel. It's one thing to kind of always talk into an echo chamber. It's another thing to actually create an echo chamber. the day that my channel becomes one where all of my subscribers believe, even on just a majority of the things that I'm saying, is a sad day indeed. And if that happens, then I will try my utmost to find an issue that will push their eyebrows back to the top of their heads. So I find that the best way to keep things fresh, because like you say, success isn't measured in views or likes, it's measured in engagement, and even if that engagement is harsh critique, that's the kind of engagement that I want to have. So my success is found in just continually finding ways to piss people off.
What I've found is whenever I have an aha moment, and what I mean by that is whenever I'm like, I read a lot of books because I love to learn. And whenever I have a moment where I'm like, oh my God, I did not know that before, that makes so much sense, I have to imagine that there's a lot of people out there who are just on the other side of that aha moment. And so when I'm able to condense that down, all of this stuff that I've been like learning over the course of a month, if I'm able to condense it down in a bite-sized piece that's laser focused and short and to the point and understandable, people eat it up, because then they get to experience the aha moment too, but they don't have to go and spend, you know, a huge amount of time to go and study and learn it. So just taking something that's fresh and interesting that excites you, that you would want to watch and that you would want to learn, and then making it really to the point and short and easy to understand, that's been my approach from the beginning, and I found it to work pretty well.
Make mine rather quick here. So I have two kind of principles when it comes to my content delivery and my marketing, and one is I try to make videos that I think that my young fans could show their mom. And that sounds a little strange, but it's actually motivated. I love creeping Alex out by how much I know about his channel and how much his channel has meant to me. So I'm about to do that right now. When I first became an atheist, like I was talking about telling my parents and then making my own YouTube channel, to kind of describe what I was feeling and what I was thinking, I sent my mom a bunch of Alex's videos.
Did she like me?
She called you at one point an arrogant boy.
My mom calls me that all the time.
But for the most part, those videos, I think, were able to reach her better than I would have been able to in a more angry state, or better than other videos that were more vitriolic atheist rants could. And so I try to make videos that my fans could show their moms, and it's funny, I've actually had my young fans like message me and say, I showed this to my mom and she didn't get mad and she actually understood what this was all about. So I like that I can do that. As far as what works well on my channel, I employ this trick. I'm giving my secrets away. I call it Trojan horse marketing. And basically that's sneaking in the good parts that you actually want to say, but you can't really market as something clickbaity. You sneak it into a clickbaity format or give it a nice thumbnail. Alex has done that quite a bit and has done pretty well with it. Like, your content's actually good, but you look at it on the surface and you're like, wow, this is...
Could you give an example? Sorry, I haven't quite...
Yeah, so my example is I have a video that got like 300,000 views in a week that I put out a couple months ago, and it was called One Thing... let me see. No, I should be able to remember my actual video. So it's like, Christian apologist says atheists can't answer this one question. You would probably click on that to figure out what the question is, right? And then you probably laugh, realizing, wow, that's a really stupid question. And it was a stupid question. And I thought, no, I can make a good video about the teleological argument, which was kind of what this was related to, and why arguments from design aren't that great. But if I title it, Why Arguments from Design Are Bad, no one's going to watch that. And so I format it in saying, like, hey, this is one question that this guy really wants us to be able to face. Like, do you want to know what the question is? And the apologist himself actually ended up seeing that video, and it was because I used Trojan horse marketing. That works fairly well for me.
Noted. We're out of time. The big boss is standing and looking. Thank you guys so much. You have your talks now. Looking forward to that.